Welcome to another episode of Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, small chain of independent record stores in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you don't already follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, please do, really appreciate it. Obviously, if you're local to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, please check out our shops. More information at ntxvinyl.com, or you can also shop online there. Today's topic is in regards to the value of your record collection and my record collection. I recently posted a video about the increased value of a lot of common reissued albums, and I just showed a few examples, but the reality is that even reissues these days, not originals, that date back to, 60s, 70s through 90s and even early 2000s, not those, but even the reissues that have come out in recent years have really skyrocketed in value. And that video prompted a lot of discussion from collectors, new and old, about the current value and maybe sustained value of their collection over time. So I thought I'd address that question because I had a lot of people ask, like, man, are my records really worth that much? Should I sell my records? Here's the reality. First and foremost, and I have to say this to myself all the time, will you ever sell your records? Like, that's a real question. Like, for me, when I go to buy a record, maybe I'm questionable about it. Maybe I already have a different copy. I'm getting a new version, or maybe it's just something that, I like a few songs. Maybe I don't really need the album, but I really kind of want it. The easiest way for me to convince myself to buy a record is just to say, oh, it's an investment, because I know it's going to go up in value and I can always sell it and make my money back and maybe even make a little extra. But the reality is, once something goes up in my collection, I know personally that I'm never going to sell it. So first of all, just be honest with yourself. If you're about why you're collecting. Are you collecting because you love the music, because you love it from a collectible standpoint, or are you actually investing in this record monetarily because at some point in time you're thinking that you might actually sell it? So that's the first question to ask yourself if you're really concerned about value, because if you never intend to sell these records, like me personally, I don't ever have any plans to sell my record collection. Now, something could change, obviously. Things could go south and I need the money. Absolutely. But I'm saying in lieu of a life-changing event, I'm planning on keeping my collection. So for me, I definitely do not look at things, or I try not to look at things as an investment. And if I do look at them through that lens, it's usually because I'm trying to convince myself to buy it. So that's the first thing. Just be honest with yourself. Secondarily, and here's the big answer. Is your collection seriously valuable right now? Well, you have to consider one big thing. How would you sell it? Maybe you've got a collection and let's just use Discogs as a common denominator as far as establishing value. You can also look at eBay and PopPsych and look at other sources, but Discogs is the website that now sells more records. More records are sold through Discogs than any other site, including eBay, right? And their prices, the sales history that you look on Discogs is legitimate based on what has sold through that platform, right? So let's just look at the median value of Discogs. Let's say you've got a collection of 500 records and the median value on that collection, let's say, is $20,000, right? The high value, maybe it's way up to $40,000 because those are sealed copies, and in the low end, the bad condition, maybe $5,000. But let's say $20,000, that median value, which as a generalization is a pretty good earmark for what a retail price is for those records individually. So if you looked up each one individually, looked up the median value, that's how you establish that $20,000 roughly, right? So then the question becomes, all right, I want to sell my collection. Well, I want $20,000 for it because that's the median value, right? Not necessarily. First of all, you've got to consider, how will you sell that collection? That's the biggest thing. If you're willing to invest the time to sell that collection, well then yeah, one by one, you can go sell all 500 of those records and you will extract the maximum value out because you'll be selling them at essentially a retail value. Let's say, again, let's just put it at that medium. Maybe it's some are higher, some are lower, but let's use that medium. How long is that going to take you to sell 500 records? Do you have the knowledge? Do you have the expertise? Do you have the time to sell all 500 of those? Maybe you do. And that's great. Maybe you want to create a business out of this. Maybe you want to maybe it needs to be your hobby. It wants to be your hobby for the next couple months or years, honestly, to sell a lot of records. Because the reality is, in order to sell a record, You've got to first inventory it, which if you've got your list in discs, you've got your collection in Discogs, you've already got that one done. That's great. You got to grade it. You got to price it. You've got to then list it and actually sell it. You got to deal with answering questions. People want photos of rare stuff. You got to deal back and forth. People want to haggle with you. They'll make, even if you don't have offers, if you're not accepting offers, they're still going to lowball you. You got to complete that transaction. You got to pack that record. You got to ship that record. You got to deal with more customer service when something gets damaged. If you sell over $600, you got to claim it on your taxes. You got to deal with the implications there. So all of those steps that I just named, there's like 10 of them at least, and those are just the big steps, not even counting all the little incremental steps. Buying, packing supplies, learning how to ship, and again, there's a lot. Whoever takes on that responsibility, that whole list of 10, 12, 15, 20 things that has to happen with every record, whoever takes on that responsibility, they're the ones that will reap the reward. And what I mean by that is, if you're just going to take your collection, all 500, and you don't have time to sell them one by one, you don't have time to even put them into bundles, or, you know, because again, you don't have time to learn the business. You don't have the time to take out of all your spare time or commit to it to actually sell them one by one. Well, whoever you offload the collection to as a whole, they're the ones who have to do all of that work on the back end, record by record, if they're going to retail it. Now, if you sell to a record store, obviously, they will want to sell a lot of it, if not the majority of it, in their shop, right? Because that's easier than selling online and dealing with shipping and all that. But there's a lot of stuff that, you know, you can put in a record shop and it won't sell because it's too niche, it's maybe too expensive, it's too rare. It may sit around for weeks or months before it will sell. And again, if a record store or anybody's invested in that and they're doing it from a resale standpoint, they got to get their investment back. That's hard when it sits around for a long time because there's money tied up into that. So I get the question all the time, like, hey, how much is my collection worth? It's a really hard answer. It's a really hard question to answer because, well, I don't know. Are you going to sell it yourself and you're going to do all of that to take the time? Or are you going to expect someone else to do that? Because if you're going to expect someone else to do all of those steps, inventory, grading and pricing and listing and packing and shipping and customer service, if someone else is going to do all that, whoever's going to do all of that, they're the ones who are going to make the most profit in most scenarios. There's obviously outliers, but in general, if someone's looking at offload their collection, they want to get rid of it. It doesn't matter if it's 100 records, 500 records, or 5,000 records. There's a ton of work that goes along with that. This is no different than any other retail business, and especially no other business that deals with collectibles or antiques or artifacts or anything that is, again, has a collectible value and has a fluctuation in value on the secondary market, right? And so that's the main point I wanted to get across with this video. Is your record collection valuable? It depends, you know. It depends on A, if you're willing to sell it, B, how much time you're willing to commit to selling it. You know, those are the big things you have to answer before, you know, you can truly understand if it's valuable or not. Yes, inherently you can look it up on Discogs, or you can go look at sold prices of what things are selling for, and you can feel good about it that you've got a collection that holds value, absolutely. But when the time and place comes, or if the time and place comes where you've actually got to sell that collection, don't be surprised if you're not going to get full market value. In fact, if you're not willing to put in the time, there's no way you're going to get full market value. There's no way any store owner or collector or reseller in any way is going to pay retail value for records if they can only turn around and sell them for retail, because look at all the time you have to put in, all those different steps. So they've got to account for all of that time, and they've got to buy the records with that in mind. If they're doing it all themselves, or if they have staff, or if they have overhead, that's all built into the price. So I see people all the time say, don't sell your stuff to record stores. They'll absolutely screw you over. They'll offer you pennies on the dollars. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen. Sure, it happens. But there's also record stores, I happen to be one of those, that will pay you a legitimate price for albums that hold value. But you got to keep in mind, I'm going to have to do all of that work if I'm paying that money. So if it's a record that's, let's say it's worth $50 median, or let's say $50 retail, I can't pay you $45 for that. I can't pay you $35 for that. I have to look at the entire collection and go, okay, if I'm going to invest in, let's say again, 500 records, and that's just one of those 500, what do I have to get the entire collection at in order for me to be able to make any profit at all over the course of a couple months? That's the thing too. This takes so much time to deal with. Doesn't matter how rare your stuff is, how collectible it is. It's going to take a human being's time to go through and manage all of that from start to finish to get all of that sold over the course of most cases in many months, if not years, depending on how big the collection is. And all of that is built into the price that a record store owner or reseller or whatever you want to call them is going to offer you for that collection. So I don't want to get anybody's hopes up by saying your records are going to be worth so much money, but at the same time, I also don't want you to think that, you know, there's no value there at all. So it's about that balance. It's about you looking at yourself and going like, you know, are these records worth something to me? Well, establish that first. And then from there, if you are at a point where you think, I just don't have time for this anymore, maybe I don't have the space for it, maybe I just need the money. Just keep it in mind whether you're deciding to sell yourself or to sell to a store or again a reseller. There's a big difference there in regards to the payout you're going to get, and all of it has to do with the time that it takes to sell the records individually. Again, if you've got if you're a store owner, it's a lot easier to put them out in a store than it is to deal with them online, but there are still costs associated with that. There's damages that happen, there's stolen items that happen, there's stuff that just sits around for months because it's too niche or it's too rare or it's too valuable. Believe me, there are records that are too valuable to sell because you've got to find a buyer for someone who will drop $500 on a record, right? It's cool to have it, and it's cool to be able to say you've got it for sale, but at the same time, you got to wait for that person to come along, right? So there's a lot of things to consider, and so you know those are a lot of the discussions I've seen online in regards to value of records these days because prices are going up so much, value is going up so much, and there are people, believe me, I've talked to many who are like, man, should I get out of this right now? Should I sell my collection while the market is so hot? Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. That's for you to decide, but just keep in mind all of the factors that go into that and whether or not you're willing to put in the time to maximize that return. Because if you're not willing to put in the time, then it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors when you're looking at that value on Discogs of what your collection is worth. Doesn't always equate to exactly what you're going to get when you go to sell it. So that's my spiel for today on the current value of records in your record collection. Hopefully that provides a little insight. I would love to hear your feedback on that. If you've sold your collection recently, I'd love to hear how your experience went. Appreciate you watching as always. My name is G.I. Sanders with NTX Vinyl, and we will see you again soon on another episode of Talking About Records.